1871. In the Mississippi Delta, the Ku Klux Klan announced a midnight hunt and chose their prey carefully. A limping, overweight black man named Elijah Booker, selected because they believed he couldn't run, couldn't fight, and wouldn't survive long enough to matter. They released him into the swamp barefoot, fired a gun to start the game, and placed wagers on how many minutes he'd last before the dogs found him. By sunrise, Elijah was still alive, and by the end of that week, 5 Klansmen were dead, shot from distances no local rifleman could explain. The Klan told themselves it was coincidence, then divine punishment, then betrayal from within. What they never considered was that the man they hunted for sport had already mastered killing under far worse conditions. Their arrogance sealed their fate. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The sun bled orange across the Delta flatlands, turning the cotton fields into something that looked almost beautiful if you didn't know better. Elijah Booker limped along the dirt road, each step deliberate, the burlap sack of cornmeal heavy against his shoulder. His feet hurt. They always hurt these days. Age had settled into his joints like rust into iron, making every movement slow and careful. He hummed low in his chest, an old hymn, the kind that didn't ask God for miracles, just strength to make it through another day. The riders came out of the tree line without hurry. 6 men on horseback. No hoods, no need for them anymore. The war had been over for 6 years, and the men who wore badges now were the same men who'd worn gray. They sat easy in their saddles, faces visible in the dying light. Young faces mostly, except for one older man with silver in his beard. That was Silas Crow. Everyone knew Silas Crow. Elijah stopped walking. His hand tightened on the sack, but he kept his face empty, waiting. Sheriff Caldwell rode behind them, separate. He sat his horse like a man watching weather from a porch, present but not participating. His badge caught the last of the sunlight. He didn't speak, didn't need to. "Evening, Eli." Silas Crow's voice was pleasant, conversational. He nudged his horse forward 2 steps and stopped. "That's a heavy load for a man your age." "Yes, sir." Elijah kept his eyes down, submissive, respectful. "Just cornmeal, sir." "Where'd you get cornmeal, Eli?" "You don't have money for cornmeal." "Mr. Patterson let me have it. For the week's work." "Patterson." Silas turned in his saddle, addressing his men like they were students, and this was a lesson. "You hear that, boys? Patterson's still paying coloreds in goods instead of scrip. That's the old way. Inefficient." One of the younger riders laughed. Another spat tobacco juice into the dust. Silas looked back at Elijah. His smile hadn't changed. "Where you headed, Eli?" "Home, sir." "Where's home?" Elijah's jaw tightened. They knew where he lived. Everyone knew where everyone lived. The Delta wasn't big enough for secrets, just cruelties. "The Hutchins place, sir. The old tenant shack past." "The Hutchins place burned down last month." Silence. "Yes, sir. So you're vagrant." Silas said it like he was reading from a legal document. "No fixed residence. Wandering the roads after dark." "That's vagrancy, Eli. County ordinance. You understand?" Elijah's breathing stayed even. His heart didn't. Inside his chest, something old and military clicked into place. The part of him that knew how to calculate distance, wind speed, the arc of a bullet over half a mile. The part that had survived Antietam and Vicksburg by never panicking, never rushing, never forgetting that emotion was a luxury that got you killed. He pushed it down. "I didn't know, sir. I can—" "You can what?" Silas leaned forward. "Read the ordinances? You can't read, can you, Eli?" "No, sir. Can't read. Can't follow the law. Can't do much of anything except eat, from the look of you." The other riders chuckled. Silas let the moment breathe, savoring it. "How much you weigh, Eli?" 200? 250? Elijah said nothing. And that limp, war injury? Yes, sir. Which side? The question was a trap. Everyone knew which side. Saying it out loud just made the rest easier for them. Union, sir. Silas nodded, like Elijah had just confirmed something disappointing but expected. Union. So you fought to destroy your betters, killed white men, and now you limp around our county, stealing cornmeal, breaking ordinances. He sat back. That's a problem, Eli. Sheriff Caldwell's horse shifted. The sheriff's hand rested on his saddle horn, not his gun. He watched with the expression of a man observing distant rain. We could jail you, Silas continued, but jail costs the county money. Food, space, and you'd just be a burden. He smiled. So we've got a better solution. More educational. The other riders were grinning now. One of them, a kid who couldn't have been more than 19, practically vibrated with excitement. Silas dismounted, walked right up to Elijah, close enough that Elijah could smell whiskey and tobacco. You ever been hunted, Eli? Elijah's throat was dry. Sir? Hunted. Like an animal. We're going to give you a sporting chance. Silas gestured to the swamp behind them, where the cypress trees rose like broken fingers from black water. Moonrise. You run. We follow. You make it till dawn. You're free. We catch you. He shrugged. Well, that's justice. The kid with the excited eyes spoke up. How far is he going to get? Look at him. Fat as a hog and limping. Exactly, Silas said. It's fair, sporting, democratic even. He looked at Elijah. Take off your shoes. Sir. Shoes. Now. Elijah set down the cornmeal. His hands didn't shake. Couldn't let them shake. He unlaced his boots, old brogans, worn through at the heel, and set them aside. The dirt was still warm under his bare feet. Good. Silas walked back to his horse. 10-minute head start. Moon's not up yet, so you've got maybe 20 minutes. I were you, I'd use them. Elijah looked at the swamp, at the darkening spaces between the trees. Inside his head, the calculations started automatically. Terrain, cover, sight lines. How far could a man move in 20 minutes if he didn't care about noise? How far if he did? What you waiting for, boy? One of the riders called. Permission? Elijah ran. It wasn't fast. Couldn't be. Not with his weight. Not with his limp. But it was movement. And movement was survival. Behind him, he heard laughter. Heard Silas Crow's voice saying something about odds, about bets. He didn't look back. The swamp swallowed him in stages. First the road disappeared, then the voices got distant. Then there was only the sound of his own breathing, the wet suck of mud, the whisper of cypress branches. Somewhere behind him, a rifle cracked. One shot, straight up into the air. The hunt had begun. The water came up to his knees, black and cold, smelling of rot and old things. Elijah moved through it slowly, each step a deliberate choice. The mud underneath wanted to hold him, pull him down, make noise. He couldn't let it. Mosquitoes swarmed his face, bit his neck, his arms, anywhere skin showed. He didn't swat them. Movement meant visibility. Pain was just information. Behind him, maybe a quarter mile, maybe less, the dogs started baying. Not bloodhounds, curs, mongrels trained to hate the smell of fear and follow it. Their voices rose and fell in waves, getting closer, then farther, then closer again. The clan was letting them work, following at a distance. No rush. Why rush when your prey was fat and limping and alone? Elijah stopped moving, stood perfectly still in the water, up to his thighs now, surrounded by cypress knees that jutted up like broken teeth. His breathing stayed even. 4 counts in. Hold. 4 counts out. The rhythm his sergeant had taught him before Shiloh, before he understood that staying calm was the only thing that separated soldiers from corpses. The dogs got louder. He needed to move, but movement without thinking was how men died. He scanned the darkness, looking for advantages. To his left, a fallen log made a natural bridge. To his right, deeper water, black enough to hide in if he could stand the cold. Ahead, a thick tangle of roots and vines. He chose the vines. Wading forward took effort. His legs burned. His bad knee, the one that had taken shrapnel at Cold Harbor, screamed with each step. He ignored it, the same way he ignored the mosquitoes, the same way he'd ignored the Meunier ball that had grazed his ribs in '63 while he'd been lining up a shot on a Confederate artillery officer. That officer had died, not knowing where the bullet came from. Most of them hadn't. Elijah pushed the memory away. Thinking about the war was dangerous. Thinking about what he'd been was even more dangerous. That man didn't exist anymore. That man had died the day Lee surrendered, and the Union decided black soldiers were more useful forgotten than honored. The vines caught his shirt. Thorns dug into his arms. He moved through them anyway, slow, methodical, until he was completely surrounded by green darkness. Then he stopped again. Listened. The dogs were confused now. Their baying had turned uncertain, circling. He'd broken the scent trail by moving through water. Simple. Basic. The kind of thing any man who'd hunted knew. But the clan didn't think he was any man. They thought he was prey. Voices carried through the swamp. Distant. Laughing. Probably drowned already. Bet you $5 he's crying somewhere. Check that hollow. I heard something. Elijah breathed, counted, waited. A shape moved through the trees 30 yards away. Man-shaped, carrying a rifle. Young voice called out, "I got movement!" Excited. Eager. Other voices answered, farther back. "Where?" "By the big cypress. I see—" "Wait!" Footsteps in water, splashing. The young clansman was running now, careless, thinking he'd found something. Elijah's hand moved without permission, reaching for a rock the size of his fist. His fingers closed around it. Muscle memory from 100 ambushes, 100 moments when one precise action meant living instead of dying. He could kill this boy. Easy. The range was nothing. 30 yards in darkness was harder than 600 in daylight, but not by much. Rock to the temple. The boy would drop without a sound. Elijah could take his rifle, his ammunition, disappear deeper into the swamp. His hand tightened on the rock. The boy stopped, stood in the water, rifle raised, scanning the darkness. There's nothing here." "Then get back over here," another voice called. "Stop wasting time." The boy hesitated, looked directly at the tangle of vines where Elijah stood, motionless, barely breathing, covered in mud and thorns and mosquitoes. For 3 seconds, they were separated by 30 yards and complete darkness. Then the boy turned around, walked away. "Must have been a gator," he muttered. Elijah's hand opened. The rock dropped into the water with a soft plop that nobody heard. "Not yet," something inside him said. "Not unless there's no other choice." The voices faded. The dogs moved east, following a false trail. Elijah waited another 10 minutes, counting his heartbeats, before moving again. He doubled back the way he'd come, moving parallel to his original path, staying in the water where his weight wouldn't leave prints. The moon rose higher. Silver light filtered through the cypress canopy, turning the swamp into a maze of shadows and false shapes. Elijah used them all. He was good at shadows, had made a career of them once, before the world decided his career didn't matter. At Fredericksburg, he'd hidden in a burned-out farmhouse for 6 hours, waiting for one specific Confederate colonel to step into view. He'd urinated on himself rather than move, had let rats crawl across his legs. When the colonel finally appeared, Elijah's shot had been perfect, clean. The man had died instantly, and the Union advance had continued. Nobody remembered that colonel's name now. Nobody remembered Elijah's either. Time blurred. He moved when it was safe, stopped when it wasn't. His body screamed at him. His knee, his back, his feet torn up by roots and rocks. He absorbed the pain, filed it away, kept moving. The sky started changing, black to gray, gray to something lighter. Dawn was coming. Elijah felt it in his bones, the same way he'd felt weather changes during long campaigns. The hunt would end at dawn. Silas Crow had said so. Sporting, democratic, fair. He pushed through a final stand of cattails, his legs shaking with exhaustion, and stumbled into a clearing. The clan was waiting. All 6 of them. Mounted. Arranged in a half-circle like a firing squad. Silas Crow sat in the middle, smiling in the gray dawn light. "Morning, Eli," he said pleasantly. "You made it." Silas Crow dismounted slowly, making a show of it. His boots hit the ground with practiced authority. The other clansmen stayed in their saddles, rifles resting across their laps, watching Elijah with expressions ranging from amusement to disappointment. "Look at you," Silas said, walking closer, covered in mud like a swamp hog, bleeding all over. "Probably caught 10 diseases out here." He circled Elijah, inspecting him. "But alive. Color me surprised." Elijah said nothing. His chest heaved with exhaustion, but he kept his face blank. Empty. The expression of a man who knew silence was safer than words. "We had a bet going," Silas continued. "Most boys said you'd drown. Couple thought the gators would get you. I said—" He paused, grinning. "I said you'd just sit down and die of a heart attack. Fat old man like you, running through the swamp all night?" He shook his head. "Should have killed you outright." The other clansmen laughed. Not cruel laughter exactly. More like men watching a trick dog that had learned a new performance. "But here's the thing, Eli." Silas stopped in front of him. "You weren't worth finishing." Elijah's eyes stayed down, looked at the mud, at his torn, bloody feet, at anything except the faces of the men who'd hunted him. "We talked about it," Silas said. "And we decided, what's the point? You ain't causing trouble. You ain't organizing. You just pick cotton and shuffle around town, quiet as a church mouse. Killing you would be like shooting a dog that's already half dead." He smiled. "Wasteful." One of the mounted clansmen, the young one from the swamp, Elijah recognized his voice, spoke up. "Maybe we should try again. Give him a shorter head start next time." Silas considered this. "Maybe, but not today. Today we got other business." He turned back to Elijah. "Go on home, Eli. Get yourself cleaned up. Tell your friends what happened out here. Tell them we could have killed you easy, but we chose mercy. You understand?" Elijah nodded slowly. "Say it." "I understand." His voice came out hoarse, damaged from breathing hard all night. "Good." Silas mounted his horse. "You're a lucky man, Eli. Remember that." They rode away, still laughing, passing a flask between them like men returning from a successful hunt. Which, in their minds, they were. Elijah stood in the clearing until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then he started walking. The road into town was empty. Too early for most folks, too late for those who'd already gone to the fields. But faces appeared in windows, behind curtains, in doorways that opened just a crack. They watched him limp past, covered in mud and blood and failure. Nobody spoke. Nobody offered help. Nobody asked if he was hurt. This was the lesson. Not just for Elijah, but for everyone watching. This was what happened when you got noticed, when you became visible. The clan could take you any time they wanted, hunt you like an animal, and let you live just to prove they owned that choice. Mrs. Roberta standing in her doorway with her daughter pressed behind her skirts. Thomas Bell sitting on his porch, hands clenched, jaw tight. Old Preacher Hayes sweeping his steps, head down, pretending not to see. All of them learning the same lesson. Elijah kept walking, past the general store, past the livery, past the white section where the hunt had started. where Sheriff Caldwell stood outside his office, coffee in hand, watching with dead eyes. Finally, Elijah reached his cabin. One room, sagging porch, surrounded by scraggly pines. He pushed open the door and stood in the threshold for a long moment, listening to the silence. Then he went inside. He stripped off his ruined clothes, washed himself with water from the basin, cold and clean, bandaged his feet with torn cloth, put on fresh work clothes, the only other set he owned, moved with slow, deliberate care, like a man who'd been broken. Anyone watching would have seen exactly that. A beaten man going through broken motions. But nobody was watching now. Elijah walked outside, circled to the back of his cabin where the cypress stump stood, dead for years, hollow with rot. He knelt beside it, joints protesting, and reached deep into the hollow space. His fingers found the oilcloth bundle exactly where he'd left it. He pulled it out carefully, carried it inside, closed the door, latched it. The bundle went on the table. Elijah unwrapped it slowly, methodical. Each fold of cloth a deliberate action. Inside, a disassembled Whitworth rifle, British-made, hexagonal barrel, precision instrument that had cost the Union Army 4 months' wages for a sergeant. They'd given it to him anyway. The scope came next. Davidson telescope sight, wrapped separately, lenses still perfect after 6 years of storage. Then the ammunition, paper cartridges, handmade, each one rolled with the exact powder charge he preferred. Finally, the journal, small, leather-bound, filled with notes written in the shorthand code his unit had developed. Distance calculations, wind readings, elevation adjustments, and names, so many names. Captain Richardson, Antietam, 25 yards, crosswind 8 meters, compensated 2 inches right. Col du Bois, Chancellorsville, 680 yards, downhill angle, single shot. Madjunt Whitfield, Cold Harbor, 440 yards, moving target, second shot required. Page after page, target after target. Each entry clinically precise, emotionless, professional. The record of a man who'd killed more Confederate officers than entire infantry companies. The Union had called him their best asset, had used him in every major engagement from Shiloh onward, had promised him recognition, maybe even a medal, when the war ended. Then the war did end. And suddenly, Elijah Booker was just another black soldier the government didn't want to pay, didn't want to honor, didn't want to remember. Because remembering meant admitting that black men had won battles that white officers took credit for. So his service record disappeared. His kill count was attributed to others. His name was erased from every dispatch, every report, every citation. He'd gone from the Union's deadliest sniper to just another freedman who couldn't read. Elijah's hands moved over the rifle components, muscle memory. He could assemble this weapon blindfolded, in the dark, under fire. Had done exactly that at Petersburg when his position got shelled. Voices drifted through the window, men talking in the distance. He recognized Silas Crow's theatrical drawl, carrying clear in the afternoon air. Revival next week, that's when we'll do it. Whole congregation of 'em singing and praying. Bar the doors, light it up, anyone who runs. Make an example, nobody forgets. Elijah's hands stopped moving. Black veterans especially, they're the problem. Got 3 or 4 in that church, including that fool we hunted last night. Laughter. Agreement. Plans solidifying into action. The hunt hadn't been sport. It had been rehearsal, practice for something bigger. The Klan was refining their tactics, their coordination, their willingness to kill in broad daylight. And the church massacre would send a message that no amount of federal reconstruction could undo. Elijah looked down at the rifle components spread across his table, at the journal filled with names of men who'd died not knowing his face, at the scope that had turned distant shapes into confirmed kills. He began assembling the weapon. Each piece fit perfectly into the next. The barrel locked into the stock with a soft click. The scope mounted with practiced precision. The trigger mechanism slid into place. His hands moved with ritual care, cleaning, oiling, testing the action. The same routine he'd performed before every mission during the war. The routine that had kept him alive through 4 years of killing. Outside, the church bell rang, calling folks to afternoon prayer. Elijah raised the assembled rifle, sighted down the barrel at a knothole in the far wall. His breathing slowed. 4 counts in. Hold. 4 counts out. The fat old man who'd limped home defeated was gone. What remained was something else entirely. The camp sat in a clearing 3 miles northeast of town, tucked between 2 ridges that made a natural corridor. Elijah had spotted it that morning from the road, smoke rising thin and steady, the kind that came from a cooking fire meant to last all day. He'd walked past without looking. Just another fat old man heading nowhere in particular. Now, lying in the underbrush 200 yards uphill, he studied the camp through the Davidson scope. 5 tents arranged in a loose circle. A fire pit in the center with a spit roast going, some kind of game meat turning slow. 7 men visible, maybe more inside the tents. Horses picketed to the east, close enough to reach quick, but far enough that their smell wouldn't foul the camp. Military thinking. These weren't just night riders playing dress-up. Someone down there had trained with an organized force. Elijah adjusted the scope's focus ring. The central tent came sharp, larger than the others, Confederate battle flag draped across the entrance. Silas Crow's tent, most likely. The man who'd called the hunt, who'd laughed about mercy while planning murder. But Silas wasn't the target. Not yet. Elijah shifted the scope left. A man sat on a stump near the fire cleaning a rifle. Young, maybe 25? Blonde beard. The same voice from the swamp who'd wanted to hunt again with a shorter head start. Range, 220 yards by Elijah's count. He'd paced it off mentally on approach, matching landmarks to estimated distances the way he'd done at Antietam. Wind, southwest, maybe 4 miles per hour. Barely a breeze. The smoke from the fire drifted northeast at a lazy angle. Elevation, uphill shot, 17-degree angle, required aiming low. Light, late afternoon sun behind him, casting long shadows across the clearing. Good. His position would be in darkness to anyone looking up. Elijah settled the rifle against his shoulder. The Whitworth fit like it always had, perfectly weighted, the stock worn smooth where his cheek pressed. He slowed his breathing. 4 counts in through the nose. Hold for 2. 4 counts out through the mouth. The blond Klansman stood, stretched, walked toward the fire with his cleaned rifle. Not yet. Patience was the difference between snipers and shooters. Shooters took the shot they had. Snipers waited for the shot they wanted. The man reached the fire, knelt, stirred something in a pot. His rifle leaned against a log beside him. He called out something Elijah couldn't hear. Another Klansman laughed from inside one of the tents. Still not yet. The target stood again, walked to the edge of the clearing, stopped at a tree, unbuttoned his trousers, began relieving himself facing away from camp. Now. Elijah's crosshairs settled on the center of the man's back, right between the shoulder blades. He calculated wind drift, minimal at this distance with this caliber. Calculated drop, the hexagonal bullet would fall approximately 6 inches over 220 yards. Aimed 2 inches low to compensate for the uphill angle. Breathed in. 4 counts. Held. On the hold, between heartbeats, when his body was perfectly still. Squeezed. The Whitworth kicked against his shoulder, the sound sharp but not as loud as people expected. The hexagonal rifling made it crack rather than boom. Downrange, the blond Klansman jerked forward. No scream. Just a sudden collapse, folding at the knees and pitching face first into the brush. Elijah was already moving. 3 seconds to verify the hit through the scope. The body wasn't moving. Then he rolled left, crawling backward into deeper cover. Didn't stand, didn't rush, just moved with controlled urgency, keeping the ridgeline between himself and the camp. Behind him, voices rose, confused at first, then alarmed. "Wesley? Wesley, quit fooling! Something's wrong! Get over there!" Elijah kept crawling. 20 yards back from his firing position, he found the fallen log he'd marked earlier. He slid behind it, pulled dead leaves over the Whitworth, and went completely still. Below, the Klan camp erupted into chaos. Men ran to the fallen body. Someone shouted for bandages. Another voice, Silas Crow, Elijah recognized it, demanded to know if anyone heard the shot. "Maybe? I don't know, I was inside." "Which direction?" "I didn't hear nothing clear." Elijah controlled his breathing. Shallow, silent, his bulk pressed against the log, hidden under brush and shadow. From 20 feet away, he'd look like part of the landscape. From the camp below, he was invisible. "He's dead!" The shout came clear and panicked. "Shot clean through!" More confusion. Men grabbing weapons, scanning the woods, seeing nothing but trees and failing light. "Who's out there?" Silas's voice, trying for authority but cracking at the edges. "Show yourself!" Silence. "This is Klan business. Whoever you are, you just made a fatal mistake." More silence. The woods didn't answer. Didn't need to. "Could be those Turner boys," someone said. "They've been talking about—" "No." Another voice, older. "Turner boys use shotguns. This was a rifle. Long distance." "How long?" "I don't know. I can't tell where it came from." "Federals?" "Federals don't shoot from hiding." "Then who?" Nobody had an answer. They spread out, searching the woods in pairs, but they were searching wrong. Too low, too close, expecting an ambush from nearby. Not a precision kill from elevation. Elijah watched them through gaps in the brush. They moved past his position twice, within 30 feet, and never saw him. He'd learned this patience at Vicksburg, waiting 18 hours in a rifle pit for one clear shot at a Confederate artillery officer. Compared to that, this was easy. The sun dropped toward the horizon. Golden light turned orange, then red. Finally, Silas called his men back. "Get Wesley inside. Cover him. We're moving camp tonight." "Where?" "Somewhere we can see what's coming." They broke camp fast, nervous, constantly looking over their shoulders, loaded the body onto a horse, kicked dirt over the fire. Within 30 minutes, they were gone. Elijah waited another hour. Full dark settled. Crickets started their evening song. An owl called from the next ridge over. He stood slowly, joints protesting. Retrieved the Whitworth. Brushed leaves from the barrel. Started the long walk back toward town through routes he'd memorized that afternoon. By the time he reached his cabin, the moon had risen. He disassembled the rifle, wrapped it in oilcloth, buried it in a different location, the hollow beneath his porch, behind a rotted support beam. Inside, he lit a single candle, made cornmeal mush, ate slowly, mechanically, tasting nothing. His hands didn't shake. His breathing stayed even. His heart rate never elevated. This was what the Union had trained him to be, what the war had perfected. A man who could kill with clinical precision and feel nothing afterward because feeling meant hesitation, and hesitation meant death. Tomorrow, the Klan would find Wesley's body when they stopped to make a new camp. They'd see the entry wound, the angle, the distance. They'd realize someone out there could kill them from further away than they could see, and they'd start to be afraid. Elijah blew out the candle and lay down on his cot, fully clothed, ready to move if needed. The new camp sat in a shallow valley 4 miles west, where the land opened into scrub pine instead of swamp. No high ground nearby, clear sight lines in every direction. Someone had chosen it specifically to prevent another shooting from elevation. Elijah watched from a quarter-mile out, belly down in tall grass that hadn't been cleared for farming. The Whitworth stayed buried. Tonight wasn't about killing. 8 men circled the fire, 1 fewer than yesterday. They'd posted sentries at the cardinal points, rifles ready, scanning the darkness with the jerky attention of men who expected bullets from nowhere. Elijah could have killed any of them. The distance was nothing. But dead men couldn't spread fear, and fear was more useful than corpses right now. He waited until the fire burned down to coals, and most of the clansmen retreated to their tents. The sentries changed at what looked like 2-hour intervals, sloppy discipline, but predictable. The north sentry yawned constantly. The eastern one kept sitting down. When the eastern sentry finally settled against a tree and closed his eyes, Elijah moved, not toward the camp, around it. Wide circle through the darkness, using the scrub pine for cover, counting steps to maintain his mental map. 200 yards out, then 150, then 100, moving in a slow spiral that brought him to where the horses were picketed. 6 animals tied to a rope line strung between 2 trees. They shifted and stamped, nervous at his approach, but not panicked. Elijah had always been good with horses. Something about moving slow and breathing steady. He reached the first one, a big roan gelding, and ran his hand down its neck. The horse snorted, but didn't pull away. Elijah found the picket knot, worked it loose with patient fingers, retied it wrong. Loose enough that hard pressure would free it. Tight enough that casual inspection would miss the problem. Did the same with the second horse. Then the third. The fourth one tried to bite him. He moved his hand, let it settle. Tried again. Got the knot done. By the 5th horse, his lower back was screaming. Bending at this angle, staying quiet, moving in darkness, his body wanted to quit. Wanted to stand up straight and crack every vertebra. He ignored it. Pain was just information. The war had taught him that too. 6th horse done. All 6 picket lines sabotaged to fail under stress. He moved to the supply area. Canvas bags piled near the largest tent. Probably Silas Crow's again. Elijah knelt, opened the nearest bag by feel. Hardtack, cornmeal, dried meat. He left it. Opened another. Ammunition boxes, powder, percussion caps. He didn't take anything. Just opened each box, removed every 3rd percussion cap, scattered them in the grass 10 feet away. Not enough missing to notice immediately. Enough to cause failures when they needed weapons to work. The next bag held rifles, 4 of them, standing upright. He worked by touch in near total darkness, finding the lock plate screws, removing them with a coin from his pocket turned sideways to fit the slots. Took out the firing pins. Put the lock plates back. Tightened the screws. 4 rifles that would click instead of fire. He left everything else exactly as he'd found it. Closed the bags. Smoothed the disturbed dirt with his palm. From the camp, someone coughed. Footsteps approached. Elijah went flat behind a supply crate, controlling his breathing, making himself part of the shadows. A clansman walked past, unbuttoning his trousers, relieving himself 6 feet from Elijah's position. The man stood there for what felt like an hour, but was probably 30 seconds, buttoned up, walked back toward the fire. Elijah waited, counted to 100, moved again. He circled back toward his original position, but stopped when he heard voices. 2 clansmen standing watch near the southern edge of camp, talking low. "Don't like it, James. Wesley was a good shot, and someone dropped him like nothing. Could be coincidence. Wrong place, wrong time. From 200 yards? That ain't coincidence. That's someone who knows what they're doing. You think it's Federals? Federals are gone. Reconstruction's over. This is something else." A pause. The sound of tobacco being spit. Silas thinks it might be that Turner clan. Says they've been making noise about us running their cousin out of the county. Turners don't have anyone who can shoot like that. Maybe they hired someone. Who? There ain't no professional guns for hire out here. This is Mississippi, not some dime novel. Another pause. Elijah memorized their voices. The first one had a slight whistle on his S sounds. The second one breathed heavy, like his lungs didn't work right. What if it's one of them colored veterans? The whistler again. Heard some of them learned shooting in the war. Colored can't shoot straight. Everyone knows that. Wesley's still dead. Wesley got unlucky. Probably some drunk hunter who ran off scared. They kept talking. Elijah kept listening. Learned that Silas was planning to meet with Sheriff Caldwell tomorrow afternoon. Learned that 3 more Klan groups were coming in from neighboring counties for the church massacre. Learned that they'd moved the date up, 5 days from now instead of 7. Less time than he'd thought. He'd need to work faster. When the 2 men finally separated to check different sections of the perimeter, Elijah began his withdrawal. Slow, methodical. Every step placed with care. His knees protested. His back felt like someone had driven nails through the vertebrae. He didn't care. By the time he reached the tall grass where he'd started, the camp was settling into uneasy sleep. One sentry nodded off. Another paced constantly, jumping at shadows. Elijah pulled a scrap of paper and pencil stub from his pocket. The kind of cheap materials nobody would question a tenant farmer carrying. By moonlight, he sketched the camp layout, marked the supply tent, noted which horses he'd sabotaged, drew rough positions for the sentries, added names beside positions where he'd learned them. James. The whistler he'd heard was called Thomas. Silas Crow in the command tent. He folded the paper carefully, tucked it inside his shirt. Then he started the long walk home, taking a different route than before. Never the same path twice. Never predictable. The war had taught him that too. The moon rode high and cold. Somewhere an animal screamed, possum or raccoon, something dying in teeth or talons, the natural order playing out. Elijah kept walking. By the time he reached his cabin, the eastern sky was starting to pale. Not dawn yet, but close. The dangerous time when darkness thinned, but light hadn't arrived. When men were most tired and least alert. He checked the perimeter of his property from habit. No fresh tracks. No signs of watchers. Probably they still thought he was harmless. Just a fat old man who'd gotten lucky in the swamp. Let them think it. Inside, he added the new map to 3 others hidden beneath a loose floorboard. 4 Klan camps now documented. Routes between them marked. Names, numbers, schedules. Elijah sat on his cot, unlaced his boots, lay back without undressing. His body screamed for rest. His mind stayed sharp, already planning tomorrow. 5 days until the church massacre. 30 Klansmen expected from multiple counties. 1 worn-out sniper who'd stopped believing in miracles somewhere around Cold Harbor. The arithmetic wasn't favorable. But arithmetic had never been the point. Morning brought low clouds and the smell of rain that wouldn't fall. Elijah sat on his porch step, cleaning dirt from beneath his fingernails with a wood splinter, when 2 men approached from the tree line. Isaiah Reed came first, tall, lean, moving with the careful alertness of someone who expected trouble from every direction, maybe 25 years old. Scar across his left cheekbone where something sharp had caught him. Eyes that never stopped scanning. Thomas Bell followed 3 steps behind. Shorter, broader through the shoulders, with hands that stayed near his waistband even though he wasn't armed. Older than Isaiah by a few years. Old enough to have seen real war, not just the tail end of it. Elijah had sent word through the preacher's wife 3 days ago. Just 2 names, no explanation. These men had come anyway, which told him what he needed to know about their judgment. Mr. Booker. Isaiah stopped at the bottom step, gave a small nod of respect. Elijah's fine. He gestured to the porch. Come up out of sight. They climbed the steps, settled against the cabin wall where anyone passing on the road wouldn't see them. Thomas kept watching the tree line. Isaiah watched Elijah. "You sent for us," Isaiah said. "Not a question." "I did." Elijah set the splinter aside, brushed his hands clean. "How much you boys know about what's been happening?" "Heard Wesley Tate got shot." Thomas spoke for the first time, voice rough like he'd spent time breathing smoke. "Heard the Klan's acting nervous. They got reason to be nervous." Elijah stood slowly, opened his cabin door. "Come inside. Got something to show you." The cabin was one room: cot, table, chair, wood stove. Elijah knelt beside the cot, worked the loose floorboard up, pulled out the maps, spread them across the table without ceremony. Isaiah leaned in close. Thomas stayed back, arms crossed. "These are—" Isaiah traced a finger along one of the routes. "These are their camps. All of them. 4 camps. 32 men total as of last night." Elijah pointed to marks he'd made. "Here's where they keep ammunition. Here's command. Here's where they're sloppy with sentries. You drew these yourself." Thomas moved closer now, suspicion mixing with something else, maybe hope. "Drew them. Verified them. Updated them." Elijah pulled out the coded journal, flipped to a page covered in his precise shorthand. "Every name I've learned, every schedule, every weakness." Isaiah picked up one of the maps, held it to the window light. "This is military documentation. Real military. Not militia playing soldier. I was real military once." Elijah said it flat, without pride or shame. "Long time ago." "What unit?" Thomas asked. "Doesn't matter now. War's over." Elijah gathered the maps back into a neat stack. "What matters is 5 days from now. They're burning down Mount Zion Baptist during revival. 60 people inside. Maybe more. Doors barred from outside. Anyone who runs gets shot." The cabin went quiet. Outside, a crow called. Another answered. "How do you know this?" Isaiah's voice had gone tight. "Because I listened. They talk free when they think nobody's paying attention." Elijah sat in his single chair, gestured for them to take the floor. They did, settling cross-legged like students. "I need help stopping it, not because I can't do it alone, because if I do it alone, it dies with me. You boys need to learn how to protect yourselves when I'm gone." "You talking about teaching us to shoot?" Thomas asked. "No, you already know how to shoot. Army taught you that." Elijah pulled out his pipe, packed it with tobacco but didn't light it. Just needed something for his hands. "I'm talking about teaching you to think, to watch, to wait, to know when killing matters and when it's just noise." Isaiah and Thomas exchanged a glance. Some kind of silent communication passed between them. "We're listening," Isaiah said. Elijah nodded, set the pipe aside, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "First lesson. You don't kill because you're angry. You kill because it's necessary. And you can't solve the problem any other way. Anger makes you stupid. Stupid gets you dead." "Hard not to be angry," Thomas said quietly. "I know. But you control it, or it controls you." Elijah pointed to his own chest. "I've been angry for 20 years, every day. If I let it make my decisions, I'd have died the first week after Appomattox." Isaiah pulled a small notebook from his pocket, a pencil stub, started writing. Elijah approved of that. The boy understood documentation mattered. Second lesson. You watch more than you act. Most men can't sit still for 10 minutes. If you can sit still for 2 hours, you learn things other people miss. You learn who's lazy, who's scared, who makes mistakes. "How do you sit still that long?" Isaiah asked, still writing. "Practice, pain, discipline." Elijah shifted his weight, his bad hip sending lightning up his spine. "Your body'll fight you. Wants to move, stretch, adjust. You make it obey anyway. You breathe slow. You count heartbeats. You become part of the landscape until you're not a man anymore. You're just another shadow, another rock, Another tree. Thomas looked skeptical. That really work? I'm still alive. Elijah said it without emphasis. Men who couldn't learn it aren't. He stood, moved to the window, checked the road. Empty. Checked the tree line. Nothing moving. Sat back down. Third lesson. You don't glorify this. What we're about to do isn't heroic. It's necessary. There's a difference. He met both their eyes in turn. When you kill a man from distance, you don't get to see his face clearly. That's a mercy for you, not for him. But you still carry it. Every single one. They don't fade. They don't get easier. Anyone tells you different is lying or broken. Isaiah stopped writing. How many you carry, Mr. Booker? Enough to know I don't want you boys carrying more than you have to. The rain smell grew stronger. Wind picked up, rattling the cabin shutters. I'm going to give you positions, Elijah continued. Routes to get there unseen. Specific targets when the time comes. You don't improvise. You don't get creative. You do exactly what I tell you because I've thought through every possibility, and you haven't. What if something goes wrong? Thomas asked. Then you follow the fallback plan, which I'm about to teach you. Elijah pulled out a blank piece of paper, started sketching. 3 primary positions, 3 fallback, 3 emergency extraction. You memorize all of them. You don't write them down anywhere someone might find them. For the next 6 hours, he taught them everything he could compress into limited time. How to judge windage by watching grass movement, how to account for elevation, how to control breathing so the rifle barrel didn't rise and fall with your chest, how to calculate distance using landmarks, how to recognize when retreat was smarter than engagement. He didn't let them touch weapons. Not yet. First, they needed to understand the thinking behind the shooting. Isaiah absorbed everything like parched ground taking water. Asked questions, made connections, saw patterns. Thomas stayed quieter, but Elijah watched his eyes tracking every detail. Different kind of intelligence, less academic, more instinctive. Both types had value. When the light started failing, Elijah stood, stretched carefully. You boys need to go. Different directions. Can't be seen leaving here together? Isaiah tucked his notebook away. When do we meet again? Tomorrow night, same time. Bring the clothes you wore in the army if you still have them. Dark colors, nothing that shows against trees. Elijah walked them to the door. And don't tell anyone. Not your wives, not your friends, not the preacher. Information is ammunition. Don't hand it to the enemy. Thomas paused at the threshold. You really think we can stop 30 men? I think 30 men who expect easy victims make mistakes. I think 3 men who know what they're doing can exploit those mistakes. Elijah gripped Thomas's shoulder briefly. And I think you boys deserve to live in a world where you're not prey. We're going to build that world. 5 days from now. Isaiah left first, moving toward the north tree line. Thomas waited 5 minutes, then headed south. Elijah watched them both disappear into growing darkness. The church bell rang 3 times, signal that revival would begin within the hour. Elijah crouched in the hollow of a fallen oak, 200 yards from Mount Zion Baptist. The rifle lay across his thighs, already loaded. His breathing came slow and measured. He'd been motionless for 90 minutes, watching the clan position themselves in the woods surrounding the church. They thought they were hidden. They were wrong. Isaiah held the western approach, tucked into a drainage ditch covered with branches. Thomas had the eastern ridge, belly down behind a rotted log that blended perfectly with the darkening forest. Both boys had proven themselves over the past 4 days. Patient, disciplined, exactly where they needed to be. Families arrived at the church in small groups. Women in their Sunday clothes despite it being Tuesday. Men in worn suits saved for special occasions. Children running ahead. Excited for the music and the gathering. None of them knew what waited in the trees. Elijah counted 63 people enter the building, more than he'd estimated. The number sat heavy in his chest. Through his field glasses, he identified the advance scouts, 4 men positioned to bar the doors once everyone was inside, 2 at the front entrance, 2 at the back. They wore farmers' clothes instead of robes, trying to look like late arrivals. But Elijah recognized their faces from his maps, knew their names, knew which ones had laughed during the hunt that started all this. The one called Miller stood nearest the front steps, smoking a cigarette with forced casualness. His partner Dixon pretended to adjust his bootlaces, eyes scanning the crowd. At the rear of the church, Crawford and Young loitered near the well, talking too loud about nothing. Elijah watched the shadows lengthen, listened to hymns singing start inside the church, voices rising in harmony, unaware. His finger rested alongside the trigger guard, not touching. Not yet. Movement from the main clan position, half a mile south, torches being lit, horses being mounted. They'd wait until full dark before riding in. Wanted maximum terror, maximum spectacle. Elijah clicked his tongue twice. Soft sound that wouldn't carry. Signal. In the western ditch, Isaiah shifted slightly. In the eastern position, Thomas adjusted his rifle angle by inches. Both boys had located their targets. Both were ready. The sun dropped below the tree line. Gray dusk settled across the delta like ash. Miller finished his cigarette, crushed it under his boot, reached for the church door handle. Dixon moved to help him, hands going to the heavy wooden bar they'd hidden in the bushes that morning. Elijah steadied his breathing. In, out. Heart rate slowing. The world narrowing to wind speed, distance, elevation. He squeezed. The Whitworth cracked. Sharp sound swallowed immediately by the hymn singing. Miller dropped, the bar falling from his hands with a clatter that made Dixon spin around, confused. Isaiah's rifle spoke next. Dixon folded without understanding why. At the church's rear entrance, Crawford heard the commotion, started moving toward his fallen companions. Thomas put him down clean, single shot through the chest. Young ran, sprinted for the tree line, shouting warnings that nobody could hear over the music. Elijah tracked him, led the target, fired. Young fell face first into the mud, silent. 4 scouts eliminated in under 20 seconds. No alarms raised, no doors barred. Elijah reloaded by touch, eyes still scanning for threats. Beside him in the darkness, something rustled. He turned his head fractionally. Preacher Williams stood there, hands empty, face twisted with anguish and fear. The man who'd married Elijah's parents 40 years ago, who'd baptized half the people singing in that church. "I'm sorry," Williams whispered. "They got my granddaughter. Said they'd—" He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Elijah understood immediately. Understood and knew it was already too late. Behind Williams, Sheriff Caldwell emerged from the shadows with 6 armed men. Not clan. Professional deputies with revolvers drawn and hammers cocked. They'd been waiting, watching. Let Elijah take the scouts, because it didn't matter anymore. "Drop the rifle, Eli." Caldwell spoke conversational, almost friendly. Slow and easy. Elijah calculated angles, distances, possibilities. Could kill maybe 3 before they shot him. But Williams stood directly in the line of fire, and the old preacher was shaking so hard he might collapse any moment. The church singing continued. Nobody inside knew what was happening outside their walls. "Your boys, too," Caldwell added. "I got men on both of them. They move wrong. They die." Elijah set the Whitworth down gently, raised his hands. "Good. That's real good." Caldwell moved closer, gun never wavering. "Been wondering who was picking off Silas's men. Should have guessed it was you. Always were smarter than you looked." 2 deputies grabbed Elijah's arms, yanked them behind his back. Rope bit into his wrists, tied professional, no slack. They searched him thoroughly, found the knife sewn into his coat lining, the derringer in his boot, the garrote wire wrapped around his belt. "Damn," one deputy muttered. Old man's a walking armory. Old soldier, Caldwell corrected. Union sniper, unless I miss my guess. We checked the records after the first killing. Found some interesting gaps in the documentation. Bodies that never got properly attributed. Lots of Confederate officers who died from impossible distances. They hauled Elijah to his feet. His bad hip screamed protest. He didn't make a sound. What about them? A deputy gestured toward Isaiah and Thomas's positions. Leave them. They didn't kill anybody tonight. Eli did all the shooting himself. Let them watch what happens when none... Caldwell caught himself, smiled without humor. When folks forget their place. They dragged Elijah toward the church clearing. Williams followed, crying now, saying prayers nobody was listening to. In the distance, torches appeared through the trees. The main Klan contingent, arriving on schedule. They must have been signaled somehow. Must have known the trap had worked. The deputies shoved Elijah to his knees in the dirt, 20 feet from the church steps. The hymn singing faltered, stopped. Faces appeared in windows, confusion giving way to terror. Silas Crow rode into the clearing first, still wearing his farmer's clothes, but carrying the authority of command. Behind him came 26 mounted men, torches blazing, rifles ready. Well now, Silas dismounted slowly, walked a circle around Elijah. The fat man who wouldn't die. Should have known you were more than you seemed. Elijah said nothing, conserved his strength, watched angles, counted weapons, marked exits. Tie him proper, Silas ordered. I want everybody to get a good look. More rope. They lashed his ankles together. Ran a line from his wrists to a fence post, pulling him upright but immobilized. The position forced weight onto his bad hip. Pain bloomed white-hot. Still, he made no sound. Torches were planted in the ground around him. Circle of fire, circle of light. The church doors opened. People streamed out, hands raised, children crying. Deputies herded them into a tight group, guns ensuring compliance. Silas raised his voice so everyone could hear. This man killed 4 good Christian souls tonight. Murdered them in cold blood while they stood guard over your revival. He's a terrorist, a killer, and he's going to die right here. So you all remember what happens to those who raise hands against white men. Elijah met his eyes, saw the lie there, saw Silas knew exactly what those good Christian souls had been planning. Didn't matter. Truth never mattered when power decided the narrative. The torchlight flickered. Shadows danced across faces, some gleeful, some horrified, most just terrified. Elijah breathed slow. In, out, counted heartbeats, began calculating what remained. They brought whiskey. That was how Elijah knew they planned to make it last. Not a quick execution, but a show. Entertainment before the sun rose and people had to return to the appearance of normal life. Silas took the first drink, passed the bottle to Dixon's brother, a thick-necked man named Charles, who'd ridden in from 2 counties over. The bottle made its rounds, loosening tongues, stoking courage that men like these only found in numbers and darkness. Look at him, Charles said, stepping close enough that Elijah could smell the liquor on his breath. Big as a barn. Thought that would save you, didn't you? Thought we'd give up chasing something so fat and slow. Elijah kept his eyes forward. The rope around his wrists had no give. The knots were professionally tied, probably by Caldwell, who'd learned proper restraint techniques in the army. Same army that had taught Elijah how to kill from distances most men couldn't even see. He ain't talking, another voice called out. Laughter rippled through the group. 26 Klansmen, 6 deputies. Sheriff Caldwell standing separate, watching with the detachment of someone who'd already decided this wasn't his problem. Preacher Williams sat on the ground near the church steps, head in his hands, still praying. The captive congregation huddled together, mothers shielding children's eyes, old men standing protective in front of their families. 63 people who'd come to worship, and found themselves witnesses to murder instead. Silas moved to stand directly in Elijah's sightline. "You killed 6 of my men." 6. Over what? Because we had ourselves a little hunt? Because we reminded you what you are? The sky had shifted from black to deep blue. Pre-dawn light starting to edge the horizon. Maybe 20 minutes until sunrise. Elijah could feel time moving, each second measured against the distance his students would need to travel, the positions they'd need to reach. "We checked the records." Silas took another drink, wiped his mouth. "Caldwell found your discharge papers. Said you served in some colored regiment. Infantry, most likely. Digging latrines and hauling supplies." More laughter. Someone threw a clod of dirt that hit Elijah's shoulder. "Except the sheriff also found some interesting gaps." Silas crouched down to Elijah's level, studying his face like a puzzle. Officers dying at long range. Whole companies losing their commanders within days. Confederate reports about a ghost in the trees who never missed. Elijah's breathing stayed even. In, out. He'd stopped feeling the pain in his hip. The body went numb when you needed it to. "That you?" Silas asked quietly, voice nearly gentle. "That fat old man who can barely walk? You, the ghost they couldn't catch?" The question hung there. Elijah could hear his own heartbeat, strong and slow. Could hear the church bells swaying slightly in the pre-dawn breeze. Could hear, very faintly, the sound of water moving through distant irrigation ditches. He said nothing. "Don't matter." Silas stood, turned to address the crowd. "Real or fantasy? It's over now. This is what happens when you forget your place. When you think being a soldier makes you equal. When you raise your hand against white men." Charles produced a rope, new hemp, the fibers still stiff. Started fashioning a noose with practiced motions. Someone dragged a wooden crate into position beneath a sturdy oak branch. The display taking shape, each element added with ceremonial precision. Elijah watched it all. Memorized faces, counted weapons still holstered, weapons drawn, weapons within reach. His mind worked the problem automatically, the way it always had, calculating angles and possibilities even when the odds approached 0. "You got any last words?" Silas asked, playing to his audience now. "Any wisdom to share? Any begging to do?" The eastern horizon had turned pink. Sunrise coming fast. Elijah could see individual trees now instead of just darkness. Could make out the faces in the captive crowd. A young mother he recognized from town, holding her daughter close. An old man named Jefferson, who'd served in the same regiment, though they'd never spoken of it after coming home. Jefferson's eyes met his. Understanding passed between them, the kind that needed no words. The old soldier knew what Elijah had been, knew what this moment meant. "Nothing?" Silas shook his head. Theatrical disappointment. Big man can't even find his voice at the end. Pathetic. He nodded to Charles, who stepped forward with the noose. The rough hemp scratched against Elijah's neck as it settled into place. They yanked it tight, not enough to strangle yet, just enough to promise what was coming. "String him up slow," Silas ordered. "I want to hear him kick." 4 men grabbed the rope's free end, started pulling inch by inch. The noose constricted. Elijah's feet lifted fractionally off the ground. Weight shifted to his neck. Air passage narrowing. His vision began to tunnel. Red edges creeping in. He didn't fight it. Conserved oxygen. Kept his mind clear. Silas had started another speech, something about order and tradition and knowing one's place in God's hierarchy. The words blurred together. Elijah focused on breathing, on staying conscious, on counting the seconds. The rope pulled tighter. Then, cutting through Silas's monologue, a sound carried across the clearing. A rifle shot. Distant, professional, unmistakable. One of the clansmen standing near the tree line dropped without ceremony, dead before he understood why. The clearing erupted into chaos. The second shot came before the first body hit the ground. Another Klansman collapsed, this one near the church steps. Clean kill. Center mass. The man had been reaching for his revolver when the bullet found him. "Scatter!" Silas shouted, diving behind the wooden platform. "Find cover!" But there was no good cover. The clearing had been chosen specifically for visibility, so the congregation could witness everything, so the display would be perfect. Now that same openness made every man a target. A third shot, a fourth, each one precise, measured, coming from different angles in the tree line. The Klansmen fired back blindly into the darkness, wasting ammunition on shadows and fear. Elijah hung suspended, the noose still tight around his neck. The men holding the rope's end had dropped it when the shooting started, leaving him dangling 6 inches off the ground. His vision pulsed red. Seconds left before unconsciousness took him. He twisted his body, fighting gravity, fighting the rope. His bound hands reached back, fingers searching for the coat seam he'd reinforced years ago. The fabric tore under pressure. The small blade he'd carried since Appomattox slipped free. 2 inches of sharpened steel wrapped in oilcloth. Another shot cracked through the clearing. A deputy stumbled backward, weapon clattering to the dirt. Elijah worked the blade against the rope binding his wrists. The hemp fibers were thick, resistant. His vision darkened further. The blade slipped, cutting into his own palm. Blood made the handle slick. "There!" Charles pointed toward the eastern tree line. "I see muzzle flash!" A volley of return fire lit up the clearing. Wood splinters exploded from a cypress trunk. But the next shot came from the opposite direction, south, near the irrigation ditch. Isaiah and Thomas moving between positions, never firing twice from the same place, just like he'd taught them. The rope around Elijah's wrists finally gave. His hands came free. He grabbed the noose, supporting his own weight, gasping air through the constricted opening. The blade worked faster now, sawing through the hanging rope above his head. Sheriff Caldwell had taken cover behind a wagon, pistol drawn, but not firing. His eyes tracked the clearing with professional assessment, calculating odds and outcomes. When his gaze found Elijah still alive and moving, something shifted in his expression. Not quite fear, recognition. The rope snapped. Elijah dropped to the ground, barely keeping his feet. His fingers clawed at the noose, loosening it enough to breathe. Air flooded his lungs. His vision cleared. Silas Crow crouched behind the platform, reloading a rifle with shaking hands. His theatrical confidence had evaporated. He looked young suddenly, scared, human. Elijah moved toward him. The clearing had descended into chaos. Klansmen scattered in every direction, some trying to reach horses, others pressing themselves flat against whatever shelter they could find. The captive congregation had dropped to the ground, mothers covering children with their own bodies. A bullet whined past Elijah's ear, too close. One of the deputies had spotted him, was taking aim for a second shot. Before the man could fire, a rifle cracked from the tree line. The deputy's weapon discharged harmlessly into the dirt as he fell. Thomas, protecting the approach. Elijah reached the platform. Silas looked up, rifle still unloaded in his trembling hands. For a moment, their eyes met. The clan leader's mouth opened, words forming, maybe a threat, maybe a plea. Elijah didn't let him finish. The blade was small, meant for cutting rope and opening rations. But Elijah had learned long ago that size mattered less than placement. He moved with the same measured precision he'd used for 3 years of war, the same economy of motion that had made him invisible to enemy scouts. Silas Crow died quietly. No theatrical speeches, no final revelations, just a man who'd miscalculated what kind of prey he'd chosen to hunt. Elijah lowered the body to the ground, then straightened. His hips screamed protest. The rope burn around his neck throbbed. Blood from his cut palm dripped onto the dirt. He picked up Silas's rifle, finished loading it with practiced hands. The gunfire had slowed. Most of the clansmen had either fled into the woods or lay bleeding in the clearing. The ones still alive had stopped shooting back, realizing they couldn't see their attackers while remaining perfectly visible themselves. Sheriff Caldwell stepped out from behind the wagon, hands raised but still holding his pistol. "Booker!" he called out. "It's over. Put down the weapon." Elijah studied him across the clearing. Caldwell had let this happen, had stood by while men organized a massacre, had tied the knots that were meant to kill him, but he'd also stopped firing when he could have joined in, had stayed separate from the celebration of cruelty. "The gun," Caldwell repeated. "Please." Before Elijah could respond, a new sound cut through the morning air. Hoofbeats, multiple riders approaching fast from the main road. Federal investigators topped the rise, at least a dozen of them, led by a colonel whose insignia caught the first rays of true sunrise. They'd ridden through the night, arriving exactly when Isaiah's coded message had promised they would. The colonel surveyed the clearing, the bodies, the noose, the terrified congregation, the scattered clansmen. His gaze settled on Elijah, still holding the rifle. "Sergeant Booker," the colonel said quietly. Not a question, a statement of recognition. Elijah nodded once, set the rifle down carefully. "You're late," he said. His voice came out rough from the rope damage, barely more than a whisper. The colonel dismounted. Had to wait for proper authorization. Federal jurisdiction isn't what it used to be. Around them, soldiers moved through the clearing with military efficiency, securing weapons, checking bodies, separating survivors into groups for questioning. The captive congregation began to rise slowly, uncertain whether this new arrival meant salvation or simply a different threat. Isaiah emerged from the tree line first, rifle held low. Thomas followed seconds later from the opposite direction. Both men moved carefully, hands visible, making no sudden motions that might be misinterpreted. They'd practiced this part, too. 3 weeks after the clearing ran red, the Mississippi Delta pretended nothing had changed. The Klan cell had been officially disbanded. Federal investigators had documented everything: the planned massacre, the midnight trials, the systematic terror that Sheriff Caldwell had enabled through deliberate inaction. Some men hanged, others sent to military prison, the rest scattered to distant counties where their names and faces might not be recognized. The church still stood, though someone had scrubbed the platform clean of blood stains. Services resumed on Sunday mornings. Children played in the yard where men had died. Elijah Booker watched the church from a quarter-mile away, hidden in the tree line where he'd spent so many nights studying his enemy's movements. His horse stood patient behind him, saddled with everything he owned. It wasn't much. The morning air carried no threat. Birds sang their ordinary songs. Insects hummed through the cypress branches. The swamp had returned to its natural rhythms, no longer holding the tension of an active killing ground. Isaiah Reed worked in the field below, planting late corn. His movements had changed since the clearing, more confident, less hunched. He carried himself differently now, not defiant, which would have drawn attention, just steady, aware. Thomas Bell sat on the church steps, rifle across his lap, ostensibly hunting squirrels. But Elijah knew the real purpose. Thomas watched the road, counted travelers, noted patterns, building the same kind of intelligence network that had saved lives when it mattered most. They'd learned well. Elijah had spent the last 3 weeks training them in everything he could pass along. Not just marksmanship, though that mattered, but the discipline behind it. How to wait. How to calculate wind and distance using nothing but observation. How to disappear after a shot, leaving no trace. How to protect without becoming the thing you fought against. Isaiah had the better eye for distance work. His hands stayed steady under pressure. Heart rate controlled even in chaos. Thomas understood terrain instinctively, could read landscape the way some men read books. Together, they'd be enough. They'd have to be. The federal investigators had been polite but firm. Colonel Morrison had pulled Elijah aside after the initial questioning, speaking in the careful language of military men who understood things civilians never would. "Your service record was erased," Morrison had said. "Officially, you were never Union Army, never a sharpshooter, never credited with any kills." Elijah had nodded. He'd known this for 6 years. "But I found the original reports," Morrison continued, "buried deep, marked confidential. 327 confirmed kills. Officers, guerrillas, artillery crews. You won battles single-handedly, and no one was allowed to acknowledge it, because a black man making generals nervous is more dangerous than the enemy," Elijah had replied quietly. Morrison hadn't disagreed. "I can't restore your record," the colonel had said. "The Army won't allow it." Too many questions about why it was erased in the first place, but I can offer you something else. He'd extended a leather document case. Inside, traveling papers, federal authorization to move west unmolested, a stipend for services rendered during Reconstruction. Not compensation, the paperwork carefully avoided that word, but assistance. Enough to start over somewhere federal authority still mattered. Elijah had taken the papers, not because he believed they'd make him safe, but because staying here meant becoming what the Delta would force him to become. A permanent weapon, always ready, never resting. He'd had enough of war. The sun climbed higher. Elijah watched Isaiah finish his row of planting, watched Thomas shift position on the church steps. Neither man looked toward the tree line. They'd said their goodbyes yesterday, brief and practical. No sentiment. No promises to write, since Elijah couldn't read most of what would be sent. Just a handshake. An understanding. Protect the ones who can't protect themselves. Don't become the terror you're fighting against. Know when to disappear. Elijah turned away from the clearing, mounting his horse with the careful slowness of a man whose body remembered every wound it had survived. His hip ached. The rope burn around his neck still showed angry and red. His cut palm had healed crooked. He'd carry these marks west, wherever west meant. Maybe Colorado, maybe California. Somewhere the war felt distant enough that he could pretend he'd never learned to kill with such precision. The horse picked its way through the swamp, following trails only Elijah could recognize. He'd spent weeks memorizing this terrain, learning every cypress route and hidden channel. Now he used that knowledge one final time, leaving no tracks, creating no pattern. Behind him, the Delta morning continued undisturbed. Isaiah returned to planting. Thomas watched the road. The church bell rang, calling people to some weekday service or meeting. Life pretending to be ordinary. But something had changed beneath the surface. The clan cell that had operated openly for 2 years had been erased completely. Not just disbanded, destroyed. Federal authority had reasserted itself, at least temporarily. Black veterans had proven they could defend themselves when pushed beyond endurance. The lesson wouldn't last. Elijah knew that. Power would shift again. Federal troops would withdraw again. New men would organize new terror under different names. But for now, this morning, children played safely in churchyards. Women walked to market without being hunted. Men worked their fields without fearing midnight trials. It was enough. It had to be. Elijah reached the edge of the swamp where it met the main western road. He paused there, looking back one final time toward the Delta he was leaving behind. Empty water, still trees, no witnesses to mark his passing. He turned west and rode. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.